fresh meat.
Welcome to the best horror movie you never saw, where we shine a light on horror movies that you may have missed, haven't seen in a long time, or just plain forgot about. On this episode, we're looking at 1998's criminally underrated supernatural thriller, Fallon. Directed by Gregory Hoblit from a screenplay by Nicholas Kazan, the film stars Denzel Washington, John Goodman, Donald Sutherland, Beth Davis, James Gandolfini, and Elias Koteas. You would think with a cast of this caliber that Fallon would be a must-see film in 1998, but mixed critical reviews derailed the movie's potential. It also happened to be released during the 5th weekend of a small independent movie named Titanic. That film would rule atop the box office chart until its 16th week of release, when Lost in Space knocked it down to number 2. That's right, folks. A since-forgotten movie adaptation of a classic TV series starring Matt LeBlanc did what Denzel Washington could not. That being said, much like the Rolling Stones song featured in the film that certainly would have grown in streams if the movie was released today, time has been on Fallon's side, and it has gained a bit of a cult following that continues to grow. Fallon sees Denzel Washington playing a Philadelphia police detective named John Hobbs, who's investigating occult murders committed by an apparent copycat killer. The original killer in question is Edgar Reese, played by Elias Koteas, and Hobbs was responsible for his capture. Despite being on death row and awaiting execution, Reese's spirits are pretty high for someone about to have his last meal. During a conversation with Hobbs, Reese grabs his hand and delivers a rather spiteful monologue in an unknown language. It's assumed to be gibberish, but anyone with basic supernatural thriller knowledge should know that the gibberish actually means something, and some seriously weird stuff is about to go down. I want to thank you guys for watching the best horror movie you never saw, and ask that if you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel right now. Like the video and click on the bell so you can be notified each time a new video goes up. And now, back to the show. As he's being executed, Reese mocks the spectators with a little jingle that will get stuck in your head long before the movie is over, and that's the Rolling Stones' "Time Is On My Side." The guy who seems pretty upbeat about dying that just grabbed your hand and started spouting off gibberish is now singing "Time Is On My Side." It all might be a little on the nose, but all bets point to Reese having some sinister, otherworldly plans in store for Hobbs when all this is said and done. As it turns out, Edgar Reese was possessed by a fallen angel named Azazel, who can enter an individual's body through touch. The hand-holding and gibberish was actually an attempt by Azazel to jump from Reese to Hobbs, but the possession didn't take. Since Plan A didn't pan out, Plan B seems like the next best option, and that appears to be doing whatever he can to ruin Hobbs' life. Like most detectives in movies of this sort, Hobbs is at first a skeptic, but a woman by the name of Greta Milano, played by Beth Davis, makes him a believer. Hobbs tracks her down when he and his partner Jonesy, played by John Goodman, are investigating murders reminiscent of Reese's that they assumed are being committed by a copycat killer. Greta explains that her father, a former detective, killed himself in an isolated cabin after being accused of similar occult murders to the ones that Hobbs and Jonesy are investigating. Even Milano wants nothing to do with the investigation at first, but she reconsiders after a terrifying encounter with Azazel, who confronts her in the guise of several strangers on the streets and attempts to possess her. Really have to respect Azazel's tactics, because the jumping from body to body sneak attack is probably much more practical than using one person. Plus, it's not as visually satisfying to just possess one person, because this method is used a few times in the film and remains one of the movie's highlights. Wanting to taunt Hobbs with an up-close and personal approach, Azazel visits Hobbs at his precinct and first possesses his friend Lou, played by the late James Gandolfini. In one of the film's finest moments, Azazel jumps from person to person, singing "Time Is On My Side" after each transfer. The song is just about to leave your consciousness. It's about to jump right back in there after this scene. Hobbs asks Lou and the others why they are all singing the song, since he's clearly not a fan of the Rolling Stones track, but they have no recollection of doing it. When Hobbs runs outside the precinct, he calls out Azazel in Aramaic, and now they're on an even playing field. As the demon moves among the people in the street, he praises Hobbs for his cleverness, but also threatens him.
Beware my wrath.
And disappears. The rest of Fallon, including a pretty clever climax and conclusion, is best to be discovered or revisited when you have time to take in this sometimes forgotten supernatural thriller from the late 90s. Director Gregory Hoblit, who played a part in making Edward Norton a star after directing in 1996's Primal Fear, has a strong visual style for Fallon and directs the film in a way that opts for atmosphere and tension over going for cheap shocks. Fallon came out during a time when movies like Seven were all the rage, and I believe it gets lost in that shuffle a bit because stylistically it goes for the same approach, but Fallon's interesting premise should have made it stand out. If anything, Fallon owes a debt to 1987's The Hidden because they're particularly similar in their aesthetic and narrative. Oddly enough, both films sit with a 7 out of 10 user rating on IMDb. Not bad company for Fallon to be in. Leading the charge in Fallon is Denzel Washington, who can give a commanding performance in his sleep or while reading the menu at the Cheesecake Factory. A movie like this needs a reliable lead and someone you can root for, and Fallon has that in spades with Washington. The actor practically radiates fundamental decency as Hobbs, but he's also able to portray the frayed, nervous terror of a man whose eyes have just been opened to the presence of undiluted evil. Supporting turns from John Goodman, Donald Sutherland, Embeth Davids, James Gandolfini, and Elias Koteas are solid, but this is Washington's show all the way, and he doesn't disappoint. Fallon was released on January 16th, 1998, and it opened at number 3 at the box office with a gross of $10.4 million. The film debuted behind Good Will Hunting, grossing $13.7 million as it began a wider launch on its way to Oscar glory, and Titanic grossing $36 million in its 5th weekend. Fallon was simply in the middle of more attention-grabbing movies, and even though the opening gross was decent, Fallon didn't have legs to sustain a decent start. In its 2nd weekend, the film fell to $4.9 million, and after being in cinemas for 4 weeks, the movie made $23.3 million in the US on a reported $45 million budget. The underperformance technically makes it a flop, and it probably didn't come out of 1998 as a film that most remembered. So why the lackluster performance? Reviews didn't help, as Fallon currently registers a rotten score of 40% on Rotten Tomatoes. The consensus reads, has an interesting premise. Unfortunately, it's just a recycling of old materials and not all that thrilling. Variety wasn't too kind to the film and wrote that Washington has the almost impossible task of holding together a convoluted picture that's only intermittently suspenseful and not very engaging emotionally or intellectually. Ouch. I guess Variety and I were watching different movies because I can't stand by that assessment at all. In a mixed review, Roger Ebert wrote, the idea is better than the execution, and by the end the surprises become too mechanical and inevitable. Looks like we agree that the idea was pretty unique, but disagree about everything else. It's cool. Let us not forget that Roger Ebert gave Home Alone 2.5 stars. Home Alone 2, Lost in New York 2 stars, and Home Alone 3, 3 stars. He wasn't always on the money. Even the presence of Denzel Washington wasn't enough to propel Fallon to box office success. But upon further review, Washington wasn't a big box office player when Fallon was released. He had certainly been in some hits like The Pelican Brief and Crimson Tide, but before Fallon there were also releases like Virtuosity, Devil in a Blue Dress, and The Preacher's Wife. In fact, in 1998, Washington was in 2 other films that didn't really light up the box office, with He Got Game and The Siege coming out after. Washington's name certainly had some respect on it for his Oscar-winning turn in Glory and his powerful Oscar-nominated performance in Malcolm X, but the actor didn't begin seeing a string of consistent box office hits until 1999's The Bone Collector, and that would continue through the 2000s with the release of Remember the Titans, Training Day, and John Q, to name a few. If Fallon had come out in 2000, I think we would see a film with much more of a box office presence. The good news for Fallon is that time has been on its side in the years since its release because it has gained a lot of cult following. Many people consider the film to be one of Denzel Washington's most underrated movies, and that audience has been vocal with every new discovery of the film. Remember that 40% rotten score on Rotten Tomatoes? The audience score is a solid 72%, and its aforementioned IMDb user rating sits at 7 out of 10. Not bad for a film that seemed to stall out in 1998. It's also believed that the Disney Plus series Loki paid homage to Fallon in its second episode. The Hollywood Reporter ran a piece following the episode that does make a strong case that the episode is referencing a key moment from Fallon. During the episode, Loki and Time Variance Authority agent Mobius M. Mobius discover where the fugitive variant killing TVA agents is hiding. Once Loki arrives at the store where the fugitive variant has set up their home base, the fugitive variant uses her powers of transference to move among the people in the store by touch as she torments the titular character. The scene is very reminiscent of the moment Hobbs is encountered by Azazel on a crowded street, where he begins to move from person to person to taunt Hobbs. If they're paying homage to you on a Disney Plus Marvel series, I'd say you've done something significant to be remembered. Fallon may have missed its moment to shine when it was released in 1998, but like most cult movies, the film has found a new life in the years as more and more people discover that it is a solid supernatural thriller with a unique premise, a compelling lead performance, and focused atmospheric direction from Gregory Hoblit. Time is definitely on your side to discover this underrated gem.